From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Now, we've covered honeybees in past episodes of pollination, but not like this. We've talked about primarily one species of honeybee, Apis mellifera, but there are a whole host of other species of Apis in Southeast Asia, and I am excited to bring you a kind of expose on these bees with a real authority who lives here in Corvallis, Oregon. Mike Burgett, Dr. Mike Burgett, is a emeritus professor. He had a 40-year career as a teacher, researcher, and extension apiarist here at Oregon State, but he's remained exceedingly busy. He still teaches here at OSU, but spends half of his time in Thailand at Chiang Mai University, where he studies the other species of Apis, but also, as you hear in this episode, another really fascinating social species of bee, the stingless bees. So in this episode, we're going to hear all about these bees, the ways that they are familiar and share a lot in common with Apis mellifera, but also how they're very, very different. I also want to remind you that if you go to our website, pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu, and fill out our survey, you can win a Oregon Bee Project ball cap, plus some postcards, all sorts of really cool things here from Oregon. We're going to be doing drawings all through the summer, and we're going to announce our first winner next week. So make haste and fill out the survey. Okay, let's go to Thailand and let's learn about these fascinating other bees in the genus Apis. Okay, well, I am so delighted to welcome back to the show Dr. Burgett. Welcome back.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to be here.
Now, the last show we had, we talked about a historic data set that you've created from 30 years now on honeybee colony rental rates. But your attention in the last few decades has really shifted to Southeast Asia and the Apis bees. Tell us a little bit about how you started to get interest in the other honeybees, the honeybees that are in Southeast Asia.
Oh, when you go to the tropics, you really encounter heightened biological diversity. And while all those living in Europe and Africa and all of North and Central and South America, the only honeybee species we have is Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, and was brought here by the European colonizers in the 17th century. But we know now that there are at least 9 species of true honeybees, meaning belonging to the genus Apis, and that 8 of them are native to Southeast Asia. So in 1981, when I was eligible for my first sabbatical, I thought I'd like to go to Asia and see some of these other true honeybees. So I spent a short sabbatical at Chiang Mai University in northern Thailand and experienced the giant honeybees, Apis dorsata, the dwarf honeybees, Apis florea and Apis andreniformis, 2 species of dwarf honeybees, and what we call the Asian hive bee, the closest relative of Apis mellifera, Apis cerana. So I got exposure to those.
And why Chiang Mai, of all places?
Well, I went to Thailand because one of my first grad students was Thai, and he finished a master's with me and a PhD at Cornell, and he was back there, and I just thought, well, he will be the proper host. Because he's associated with a very, very good university in Thailand, Kaset University, which literally means agriculture.
Okay.
So I spent the first month at his campus west of Bangkok, and he suggested I might want to go up to Chiang Mai University up in the north, which is much more mountainous, and it was a younger faculty, and so I said, yeah, it sounds good. So I went up there, and they in a sense, happily said, yes, he can do his work here. So they gave me lab space, office space, and front office support. And so I worked there and really enjoyed it. Well, a couple of years later, I had a chance through the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. They were sponsoring a big meeting on Apis mellifera beekeeping in Southeast Asia. So I was an invited speaker for that meeting. And then I had another opportunity a year after that to go back to Thailand, another opportunity, and it just got to the point where I got to know the place rather well. And, you know, when you go overseas to study, there are language barriers, there are cultural, not barriers, but unfamiliar cultural things. So I was getting to where I was kind of used to working there. It's like a dear friend of mine at OSU in the botany department said about steelhead fishing. If you learn one part of one river under all conditions, you'll catch more fish than those people that run all over the place. So I got to the point that where I was going often enough to Thailand that people associated me as an expert. Whether that's the case is yet to be determined. But they were very, very, very welcoming and continue to be so. And I have a courtesy appointment at Chiang Mai University, and I also have the ability to mentor graduate students there.
You know, maybe this is a good detour. I want to get into the bees, but just the Thai bee research. Like, there's a lot. You've had people come over here to Oregon State, but there's a vibrant bee research.
There is. Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, one of the oldest and most famous Thai universities, has a young man who did a PhD at the University of Kansas in looking at, well, basically taxonomy, but he knows honeybees very well, and he has a very, very active program there. Chiang Mai University has had a bee person for as long as I've been going there, which is now 38 years. And their newest one is a former student of mine. I was the mentor for her PhD there, and she finished in 2015 and has just recently been offered the bee position in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. So she's the one I collaborate with now. But there are other national universities that have had, like Kesetsart University had 2 people involved in bees for a while. Konkan University in the Northeast has traditionally had a bee person.
That's a lot of bee positions for a small country.
Yes, it is. Population of Thailand is about 75 million, and it's geographically about the size of the Pacific Northwest. So on a per capita basis, there's quite a nice bee program there.
So are these different Apis species spread uniformly through Thailand, or are they focused? Okay.
No, they're pretty uniformly spread. Yeah, I can say that easily because I've traveled the entire country and I've experienced all species of Apis there throughout certainly the latitudinal breadth north to south. And then starting in the early 1980s, funding by the Royal Project was the introduction of Apis mellifera to Thailand. And the Apis mellifera, as a matter of fact, one of the first major introductions was a former student of mine came here with a pocket of money in an order for 100 honeybee hives. So we went to California, picked up 100 packages of bees and ordered equipment for 100 colonies, all of which was delivered to SeaTac Airport and on Thai International Airways because it was the Royal Project. It flew back to Thailand with no charge for the freight.
Wow.
So this was a student of mine. But there were other point source introductions of mellifera there, and the commercial beekeeping industry in Taiwan had a big influence too, shipping Apis mellifera to Thailand. So Thailand now has a Apis mellifera bee industry about the size of California's.
Wow, that's amazing.
they're looking at 300 to 400,000 colonies of bees, depending upon the season. And they've become they quickly saturated the national market for honey. So they've been involved in honey exporting for 30 years now.
Okay, so tell us a little bit. Let's go from smallest to biggest. Just give us a little snapshot or vignette of these different bee species, starting with the smallest one.
Well, the dwarf honeybees, the two species, Apis florea and Apis andreniformis, they're not under any domestication or cultivation by humans, but they are widely hunted. They build but a single comb about the size of a dinner plate.
Really? Just the size of a dinner, just one comb?
Yep,
okay,
and it'll have up to... And they layer it with a curtain of adult bees, and underneath there, the queen's laying eggs, and they store the honey at the top of the nest. And they're seasonal, they're naturally migratory. And so as nectar and pollen resources dry out, they will move. So
they just leave the comb behind and they just take off?
Yeah, they let everything hatch out by way of brood.
Uh-huh.
They suck up every ounce of carbohydrate that's in the colony, which can be, I've seen up to 2 to 3 pounds of honey in a mature colony. But they're under heavy predation by humans. And you go to most regional or municipal markets, and you'll find a section of selling insect products, and it's not at all unusual to see whole combs. They want everything except the adult bees.
Uh-huh.
And they're relatively...
So if I went to a market in Thailand and found a Florea or andreniformis comb, what would I do with it?
Well, it would have the top section would be the honey, and you'd love that. And you would eat the brood.
How would you eat it?
Well, actually, in 2019 when I was there, we went to a market, and here was a seller and buyers coming up, and my student asked them, what are you going to do with the brood? And this one lady said, well, you eat it like a pizza, uncooked, and they eat it raw.
Okay. So you just take the wax and everything, and
they just chomp it right down, spit out the wax, and swallow the rest of it.
Okay.
Or swallow the wax.
Have you done that?
Not
Florea nest like a
not
pizza?
with Florea. No,
Okay.
I haven't. But they're incredibly important pollinators. There's a very, very in Thailand, and I'm including Myanmar and Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam. There's a very high level of what I call environmental background pollination, because you have these 5 to 6 to 7 species of honeybees. I mean, no one country has all 9 species.
Okay.
But Thailand, for example, has 5 species, and including Apis mellifera. So there's 4 native species in Thailand, and then you add mellifera to the mix.
Okay.
And the commercial beekeepers there, with mellifera, there's very, very little pollination market, simply because the background level is so high.
Yeah.
So their major products that they market, of course, are honey, and there's a big market for royal jelly from Apis mellifera, which gets exported primarily to Japan.
Okay. All right. So back to these 2 species. You said they were migratory. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in the north of Thailand, where I am, starting in January, especially in February and March, the swarms just start coming in and landing and setting up home. And most of my time that I've spent in Thailand, which is verging on accumulated 7 years now, has been spent in the winter period, January, February, March. So I'm not there. I haven't been there very much during the rainy season, when they tend to depart. But they aren't long distance migration. We're talking about, from what little we know about it, that maybe they're going as far as 3 or 4 miles and reestablishing a home. The giant honeybees, on the other hand, Apis dorsata, they are known to be long distance migration, undertake long distance migrations of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles.
Okay, let's get to them in a second. So we've dealt with two species. Who's the next in size range?
That would be Apis cerana, what they call the Asian hive bee.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a bee of commerce, though in Thailand it's all smallholder activity. There are no commercial Apis cerana. If you had 10 colonies of Apis cerana, you'd have a lot.
Okay.
So you go into any village, and Thailand is still an agricultural nation. You go into any small village, you're going to find 3, 4, 5, 6 families that are keeping cerana, generally in a log hive or a plank hive format. Mm-hmm. In the south of Thailand, there is some movable comb Apis cerana beekeeping, and I've witnessed that on several occasions. But in the north, it's just, hey, I've got this hive, I'm going to harvest honey from it once a year, and that should be enough to last my family for the year, and especially if you've got a couple hives. A good extraction from a cerana colony would be 15 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Once a year.
But you have to extract it by crushing the comb?
Yeah, it's crush and drain.
Crush and drain.
Crush and drain. Pull the combs out, throw them in a nylon sock and crush it and hang it over a bowl. Yeah, there's no centrifugal extraction with cerana.
So it's the only one that had like the European
right.
African bee. It lives in a cavity.
Lives in a cavity, builds multiple parallel combs. If undisturbed, they will maintain perpetual residence in a colony. But when you go into a colony, and especially when they're in fixed comb beekeeping like log hives and plank hives, the result of that honey extraction, the bees will usually abscond within a day or two.
Okay.
And so you're just sitting there hoping that a swarm comes in and reestablishes itself. There's a village north of Thailand where there's a lot of coffee grown, and this is Arabica type, and there are many people in that village that are keeping bees for keeping cerana in log hives and plank hives for two reasons. One, for the honey, and they sell it as coffee honey, and coffee is a very good honey plant. And also they're there for the pollination benefit.
Just out of curiosity, what does coffee honey taste like? Have you ever tried it?
Oh yes, it doesn't taste like Starbucks.
Is it a light or a dark honey?
It's a medium amber. It's
okay.
an amber honey. But as most beekeepers realize, if you can put a floral label on a jar of honey, you can put the price up.
Right.
And whether it's true or not.
Okay, so you said log, which I can picture, but plank? What's that?
Yes, it's the next step in the evolution of beekeeping, where you just slap 4 boards together for the sides, the top and bottom, and put the bees in it.
And they just anchor the comb on the top plank.
Cerana, interestingly, cerana does this. They anchor the combs on the top, and there's very, very little anchorage of combs to the side of the cavity.
Oh, so you can just pull it up?
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Yes. We had another student of mine there. Her master's thesis was looking at the natural nest of cerana, and she, and with a little assistance from me at times when I was there, we looked at about 25 log hives. And it was really fun because when you could get the top pried off and you could just very carefully lift it out and everything comes out. It's
wow.
Very, very nice. As opposed to mellifera, they'd be using burr comb to the sides of it.
Right, it'd all be stuck together.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so we've got dwarf, we've got our cavity nester, Apis cerana, right. And who else do we got?
The giant honeybee Apis dorsata, which is...
How giant are we talking?
Well, the workers are the size of an Apis mellifera queen. Easily.
Okay.
Easily.
Right.
And they too build a single comb, usually with some degree of elevation. I've seen them up 30, 40, 50 feet in trees.
Oh, wow.
They will also exhibit a phenomenon we call aggregate nesting. So the best one I've ever seen there was a bee tree with 75 colonies.
I remember I saw a slide of this. You were telling me, and I think you told me at the same time it was associated with this apocryphal story that Tom Seeley had
Of
about
yellow rain.
The yellow rain.
Yes.
Tell us
Yeah.
the yellow rain story.
Well,
And then we'll get back to the...
right. Back during Ronald Reagan years, there were accusations from the United States that the Russians were using chemical weapons via Cambodia and Laos. And Tom Seeley, who at the time was, I think Tom was still at Yale. Tom's tenure at Yale was about 3 or 4 years before he went to Cornell. But anyway, he and a guy named Mickelson, I think it was, Tom was thinking, hey, this spotting pattern, Tom had been to Thailand and worked with giant honeybees. It sounds more like mass defecation of giant honeybees. So he went over there, went to Chiang Mai, found a temple, a beautiful temple that had several trees that were loaded with giant honeybees. And what the bees do in the afternoon is you have this curtain of bees over the comb, and the bees are just hanging there, and they're there to regulate the temperature of the brood nest and some humidity control. But if you're hanging there clinging to your sisters all day long, once in a while you have to defecate. So they have periods where usually in the afternoons, where 90% of the bees will leave the colony, go in the air, and they all defecate and then fly back and recluster. And Tom went and laid out white sheets on the ground, and these things would happen. Anyway, they got a lot of giant honeybee defecation taking place. So they measured the spots, what was in them, and compared this to what little data the State Department had released about this deadly toxic spotting that was taking place, and accusing the Russians of this. And they very convincingly showed, and it was published in Scientific.
It wasn't chemical warfare.
No, it was not chemical warfare. Actually, this one tree I witnessed that had 75 nests in it, and it was on the border with Burma or Myanmar. And then I went over there, and the first afternoon I saw it, I was just enthralled, absolutely enthralled. And I'm just taking photograph after photograph after photograph, and all of a sudden I noticed one of the colonies, all the bees were coming off, and then pretty soon all the bees came off, all the colonies, and they were just this huge cloud of 500,000 bees in the air.
Really?
And they were all defecating. And I think they were using me as their target. I was wearing a white shirt that day, and it turned out very brown.
Okay, so why, do you have any sense of why? Is it predation pressure? Why would a bee want to be close to its neighbor? You think they'd have to compete for resources? Good question. Good question, and I don't know that I have a reasonable answer for it. If you look at Apis dorsata in the Philippines, they don't aggregate nest. Oh.
But there's some suggestion that this is a third species of giant honeybee, or certainly a subspecies of Apis dorsata. But throughout its Southeast Asian range, it's known to be an aggregate nester. I've seen them. I had a project in Bangladesh where there was a building, and I think I counted 35 colonies of bees on this one building. Whoa. And you would think that question, wow, why are they aggregating so close? Well, it would appear that this happens when there's a real floral abundance. I have a building on the Chiang Mai University campus right next to the one I'm in that has a 4th floor cornice overhang on it, and it gets giant honeybee colonies every year. And I think the maximum we've ever experienced there was 6 colonies at a time. But I've seen them to where a couple years ago we had 3 colonies, 1, 2, 3, and they were each within a foot of one another.
That is bizarre.
And it's not mother-daughter things either. These are separate units.
So they're not related, so it's not as though they're inclusive fitness factors into this. Okay.
No. In fact, not Mark Winston. The guy out of Australia.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Did some work on that, did some genetic analysis of it, and found that the 2 queens in adjacent colonies are
Ben Oldroyd?
Ben Oldroyd,
okay.
Yeah. that they are not genetically related. I mean, it's not a mother-daughter thing or sister thing.
Okay, but you also said, like Florea and Adreniformis, they migrate.
Yes, they do.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there are some places in the world where the migration patterns are known much better than in Thailand. I'm trying to work that out in Thailand. But in Sri Lanka, it's been well studied. In parts of Yunnan province in southern China, it's been well studied. And it's what I've observed in northern Thailand is starting in December, swarms start showing up. And the swarm arrival season is starting in December. January, you'll see them. February is you'll see the most numerous swarms in February and extending into March. And then in the late part of the rainy season, August, September, October, they leave. And one of the projects we have ongoing is how long does a colony stay? And there's tremendous variability in that. We have a colony right now that has been in place for 15 months, which is, wow, really surprising. But it's in an urban environment. And urban environments tend to have much greater floral diversity. So
it seems to be triggered by resources.
That's what the hypothesis is.
Not onset of rain as much as
Yeah. But they're, I don't know, right now, if I look at we have about 35 really good data points to where we saw the swarm arrive, we saw the colony abscond. I mean, they'll set up, build comb very, very quickly. And the biggest dorsata comb I've ever seen was 6 feet across and 5 feet deep. And that's big, with probably 70,000 bees in it. Numbers are bantered around about how many bees are in a colony of this, and there's no hard data.
Okay.
And we have a small project going on right now where we're looking at this. But to collect an entire colony is a challenge.
I can imagine.
Yes.
It's not just a matter of walking up and opening the lid.
Well, what we did last December was we hired a father-son team of professional giant honeybee hunters.
Professional giant honeybee hunters.
Yeah.
That's a profession.
Very, very well experienced. And what we did was make a very large net. So they had to climb the tree, get the net around the bees, the entire colony, and then haul up a small tank of CO2.
Oh, what a good idea. And then they all went to sleep.
Yeah. And actually, it wasn't a net. It was a large plastic bag, a huge plastic bag.
So they all dropped into the bag?
They all dropped into the bag. We just... bringing
the CO2 cylinder up that high must have been a bit.
Well, it's a pretty small one. It's not one of these gigantic ones. But we hope to continue this work too, because I have a series of papers that started here at OSU on essentially saying how many honeybees live in a square inch of comb. Mm-hmm. How densely will bees pack? And so I did that with Apis mellifera, and then I thought, well, it'll be fun to do it with these other Asian species. Mm-hmm. So we had a recent paper came out 2 years ago looking at Apis, the 2 species of dwarf honeybees. And of course they're much more heavily packed than Apis mellifera because there's a single comb and there's this curtain of bees, and a mature Apis florea colony will have up to 10 to 12,000 bees on it. On the size of a dinner plate.
Yeah.
So they really pack it in.
It raises this question, and maybe after this we'll take a break and come back to some of your current research, but it raises a question that I often wonder, because I've had this transition in my career from honeybees to native bees, and there is a kind of perspective you gain in stepping outside, but you've had this wonderful perspective of looking at different Apis species. How has it really changed your perspective of honeybees, the managed honeybee? Has it given you any insight? Because you talked about the packing, and I imagine there's other kind of things where you look back on Apis mellifera and you're like,
Well, in terms of how this relates to mellifera, my earliest work in Thailand was looking at varroa, and then the giant honeybee also has a brood mite, which is the genus Trobolelaps. and which will readily shift to Apis mellifera.
Oh, right. Okay.
So if you're a Apis mellifera beekeeper in Southeast Asia, Varroa doesn't present much of a problem because the brood mite Tropolaelaps of the giant honeybee is much worse.
Oh.
It has a shorter egg to adult cycle, and it'll kill the colony before Varroa really gets established.
Ooh, that's scary.
So in 1988, I went over and I took Apistan with me. I want to see how well Apistan works.
Oh, one of the early acaricides.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to see how well it worked against Tropolaelaps, because Tropolaelaps in hive biology is somewhat similar to Varroa. And I figured it would be a pretty good compound to use, and indeed it was.
Okay, good.
But Thai Apis mellifera beekeepers have been battling these two brood mites ever since they started the industry in the early 1980s. And they started out with a mixture of sulfur powder, sprinkling it on the bees, sprinkling it on the bottom board, and having the mites crawl through it. And they used a lot of fluvalinate, but the mites quickly developed resistance to it. So they've been, past 10 years, heavily relying on amatraz.
Oh, really?
And if you do not treat an Apis mellifera colony for mites in Southeast Asia, that colony has a very, very limited lifespan.
So would you say, so there is that insight. You've seen the same parasites from different species. So it's given you an appreciation. And I know, for example, APHIS, the USDA monitoring, they're looking for Tropolaelaps, and they've developed tests. We really don't want that mite to ever come to North America.
No.
But is there other perspectives you've had? You're looking at these different species, and you're like, oh, I can just, when I sit here talking to you and I think about absconding, for example, which occasionally happens in honeybees, but not nearly to the extent that these are there's some kind of similarity.
Yeah. Well, the dwarf honeybee and the giant honeybee, those three species, it's all predation by humans. There's no management. There's no beekeeping involved.
Right.
With Serrana, there is, but in Thailand, it's never advanced much beyond 5 hives in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said earlier, to find a quote-unquote commercial Serrana beekeepers, I don't even know that they exist.
Mm-hmm.
I've been told that there are some individuals in the south of Thailand. And if you go to Thailand from north to south, which is about the same as from Portland to Los Angeles, you find a higher density of Serrana the further south you go, the more tropical you become.
I see.
And there's more Serrana beekeeping down there in terms of, I think, individuals involved, and they have gone to at least some beekeepers using movable comb hives. But I don't know of anyone that would say, no one owns 500 to 1,000 to 2,000 colonies of Apis Serrana in Thailand. Nobody. And one of the reasons is, of course, is because the yield per colony is much lower than mellifera.
Mm-hmm.
And when mellifera was first introduced to Thailand in the early 80s, Serrana beekeepers looked at this foreign honeybee and saw that under the right conditions they could get 150 pounds of honey from it.
Mm-hmm.
And they went, wow, why am I keeping Serrana when here's this animal?
Okay.
Well, as I say, Serrana's in Thailand at least, Serrana's a backyard bee, whereas the commercial beekeeping is mellifera. And you're fighting all kinds of problems with mellifera, but they do it, as I say. The size of they have two national mellifera beekeeping organizations in Thailand. They're producing a great deal of honey, most of it for export, and then the royal jelly part. But the thing that's missing compared to North American commercial beekeeping operation is there's no rental of bees for pollination purposes. None.
Well, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back, and you will. I will quiz you because you've got some great new papers that came out just this last year with some really interesting findings. So let's take a quick break. Okay, all right, we're back. There's a little song that goes there. So we didn't really take a long break. We've have like, I've known Mike since I got here. Well, even before. So anyways, I've known you for a while. So we don't need a long break. We're just straight at her again.
Right, you betcha.
So I guess the thing that we've had a number of great papers come out this year, which is, I guess you're not really retired because you're also teaching and doing all sorts of things. But the one paper, we were talking about honey production before, you were looking at the moisture content of the honey that's produced, variation in moisture. Why is that an important question anyways? And let's start. What's the moisture content in honeybees?
Well, USDA recommendations, because there's no strict regulation, but from a biological perspective, you need to have your moisture 1.5%. If not, you have the possibility of your honey fermenting on you.
Right, and you'd hear stories in the old days of people who just didn't really get that, and their lids would pop off.
Yes, yes, yes. So I had a project. Was consulting on a project in Bangladesh. 3 years, and a major source of honey for them is giant honeybees, where honey hunters go into the mangrove swamps called the Sundarbans at the river, and the government was complaining this honey is very, very wet. So down there, the times I was there 3 times, and when I was out with the honey hunters, and when they would collect the comb, I got capped honey. So, by the way, giant honeybee.
6 inches deep?
6 inches deep.
What do you mean 6 inches deep?
Well, it's the top of the comb. It's where they store the honey.
Oh.
And the honeycomb is much wider than a brood comb.
So it's not...
the reason I thought this is like honeybee comb is all uniform.
Yes.
You're saying in dorsata it gets thicker and thicker, so they're packing more and more nectar.
Right.
Oh.
And the deepest cells I ever saw were 6 inches. Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was a foot across.
That is
the honeycomb was a foot wide.
So you've got this big long column of nectar they're putting in there.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So I had a handheld refractometer with me, so I just sat out there in the honey hunter's boat and opened up individual cells and measured the honey content, or the moisture content.
Oh, so they'd already been capped, so presumably the bees had already...
He puts a cap on the honey.
Yeah.
They're not worried about it fermenting.
Okay, all right.
They finished it off.
So you were uncapping these, sucking it out, and then looking the moisture content using this tool. Okay.
Right. And it worked out to where the moisture content was averaging 23%.
Whoa.
I went, wow.
What? Way higher.
Yeah, giant honeybees are really packing what we call wet honey. They're capping what we call wet honey. Ooh, interesting. And they don't seem to be experiencing a fermentation problem. So then I had another former student of mine in Thailand. She was looking for a little project for one of her graduate students. And I said, well, I have this unpublished data on giant honeybee honey moisture, and no one's ever looked at Florea and Andreniformis, and there are a few papers on Serrana. So why don't you have your student look at honey moistures? That's great. So she and I and the student sat down and we discussed methodologies in terms of where you're going to get your honey, and then we went over, how you do this. So anyway, the student went and collected a lot of samples. Apis cerana, the Asian hive bee, and 2 species of dwarf honeybee, and then we used mellifera as a standard. And it was interesting. And this was all in the Chiang Mai region. So we're all these honeys are collected from one geographic area.
Oh, okay, great.
Which I think is important. And what we found was that the driest honey was mellifera. The 2 dwarf honeybee species, there was no statistical difference between them, but they were up in the neighborhood of 20% moisture.
I'll be darned.
And then dorsata was right up there at about 22 or 23%.
So are these
the
bees...
tropical bees
Yeah.
are capping
That seems
we would call wet
counterintuitive.
honey. Yes,
I would think
yes.
the bees that came, these are bees that are originating from Europe, where it's dry outside, could go a little wetter, and in the tropics where things spoil quicker, they'd be drier. And so this is completely counterintuitive.
Well,
What's going on?
the mellifera that you see in Southeast Asia, and there have been several Thai scientists have looked at this, the genetics of them, and they're a mix of Italian honeybees, Carniolans, Caucasians. But the point is, they're all European.
Yeah.
So they're all temperate in origin.
Yeah.
So when you take a temperate animal species and stick it in the tropics, you expect to see some differences.
Yeah.
There is this residual, well, we still want to have honey as dry as we can.
Yeah.
And the question is, in that environment of higher humidities and higher temperatures, how dry can bees make honey?
Yeah.
I had one Apis cerana sample, this was aside from the study that I'm talking about, that had capped Apis cerana honey at 16% moisture.
Wow.
So they can do it.
And it strikes me, once you've got the cap on, it's waterproof.
Right.
And so then it's set. So if you can get it dry and cap it, you're good.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
So there have been a series of papers published from India, from Pakistan, wherever, on the honey moisture content of dorsata.
Although I can imagine 16% honey is like eating dust.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyways, keep going.
But I thought, well, let's do this and get the honeys from one region. And well, the honeys were collected. You expect some seasonal variation, and the honeys were collected throughout the year. So there's not the dry season. We didn't have enough sampling to say dry season versus wet season.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
But, we thought if we take the honey to sample from under the cell cap, under the wax cap, that it's as dry as the bees are going to make it. So
I have my own theory about this, because bumblebee honey is as runny as you can make it. And I was like, because they're not meant to store for very long.
exactly. And I'm trying to think who it was. I looked at bumblebee honey in my PhD.
Yeah. Oh, you did?
Yeah. Well, I was looking for the glucose oxidase mechanism, and it's there.
Oh, I'll be darned.
It's there.
Okay.
But in bumblebee colonies that I examined, I would find pots of very dry honey.
Really?
Yeah. Not often, but you'd find some pots of very dry.
Was it like right at the bottom they forgot about it or something?
Well-
Like squirrels?
And then the most common one is, like you said, you'd find quite runny honey, meaning quite wet.
Yeah.
But this was honey that was being consumed right now.
Yeah.
So
Well, I was just thinking, you were telling the migratory patterns, and
Right.
that these bees aren't going to, although you did mention 15 months in the same spot, but by the typical pattern is they're going to have to cart it off at some point.
I'm glad you brought that up. The 15 months is a real outlier.
Yeah. Okay.
A real outlier. Right now we're looking at roughly 6 months. They move in, they're there 6 months, they move out, and they come back in 6 months.
No reason to put 3 coats of paint on that place.
Exactly. And they do not reuse old combs.
That's crazy.
Now, last year,
It's a lot of work.
2018, I had a colony that was there, and often with dorsata, they'll be there a month and then just leave. Maybe run through one brood cycle and just leave.
Wow.
And we still don't understand that. For some reason, they were unhappy. I think it's with the microclimate of the immediate location. But there was a colony that sat abandoned for 50 days, and another swarm came in and took over that empty comb.
But it's very rare.
Very rare. Very rare.
Okay, so you also did some work on male investment.
Male investment.
Tell us a little bit about that.
With giant honeybees. Giant honeybees are unique in there's just one cell size. One
Oh, there is?
for brood.
Well, as opposed to honeybees where the males are in bigger cells.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Dwarf honeybees, Apis cerana, the Asian hive bee, and Apis mellifera produce a larger cell to rear drones.
Okay, gotcha.
Giant honeybees don't. So if you're in a mellifera colony, you can see a queen chugging along, and we know that she actually measures the width of her cell with her front legs. And depending upon the width of the cell, cues her whether to fertilize the egg or not fertilize the egg. Okay. So worker or drone. So I said to myself, well, with giant honeybees, how does the queen know to produce a drone if there's no difference in the cell size? Now, there is a small difference. The cells run from 5.1 to 6.1 millimeters.
Oh. And
there was a Vietnamese researcher who published a paper that said that they produce drones only in cells that are 5.5 to 6 millimeters wide, and the smaller cells are workers only. Well, what I've noticed is they'll produce workers in any size cell, and drones tend to be restricted to the wider of the cells, but they're not being built. This is going to be a drone cell.
I see.
But our question was, I did not address, hey, what cues the queen? But the question was, how many drones does a giant honeybee colony produce? And there's been quite a few papers on mellifera drone production, including the great Mark Winston had some really nice work on that. So what we did was to collect colonies. We would smoke the bees off the comb and cut down the brood comb. We'd bring the brood comb back to the laboratory, put it on a table, and we would start at the bottom row of cells, row 1, cell 1, and we would examine every cell, and with an Excel software, we'd just say empty, or egg, or larvae, or pupae, or pollen, or nectar.
Okay.
And we just counted every cell in those colonies.
Okay.
And sometimes we're looking at 12,000 colonies, or 12,000 cells, 12,000 cells in a colony.
Okay.
So, wow, it's a lot of work. But what happens with dorsata is they move in and they build their comb and they start producing brood, and they don't start producing males until about after the 3rd month of residence. So one of our problems was we did not have exact ages on these colonies. Hey, January 1st is when this colony flew in here. But we knew from size of colonies and state of the brood that, okay, this was an older colony versus a very young colony. But anyway, one of the things that giant honeybees do for a drone cell is, if you look at, let's go back to the European honeybee, the cap on a drone of a European honeybee is quite raised. It's easily recognizable.
That's right.
But with dorsata, in the research, you read the research papers and people say, oh, you can't tell the difference. Yeah. Well, actually you can. If you get them at the right angle, the drone cells are maybe a millimeter higher than a worker cell. But anyway, we went through, and our question, the data we collected was, if there are 5,000 pupae in the colony, how many are drones?
Because just to put it for the listeners, a drone does not do work, and so they are expensive. They're not going to help the colony except pass their gametes on.
Right. They are.
So you don't want to, you can imagine there's a pressure on a colony not to have too many of these. If you have too few, you don't pass your genes
Exactly.
on. Okay, right.
So what we found was some pretty good variation, depending upon the age of the colony. But I think it came out to, Lord, I can't remember the figure now, what the average was. It was lower than anything that had been recorded for mellifera or Cerana, or Florea or dorsata, or Andreniformis, the 2 dwarf honeybee species.
So these big giant honeybees have less investment in the males.
It appears so. Huh. The colony I remember the colony that we had that had the most males per worker pupae was 13% of the brood nest, the pupal bees. Mm-hmm. You can't sex them in the egg stage. You can't sex them in the larval stage. you have to wait till they cap it.
Oh, of course, right.
And so when you pull off the cap, those huge eyes of the drone are right there looking at you. So to guarantee we had the right gender of these things, we examine the pupil, what we call the pupil cohort. So I think the average was in the neighborhood of 8%. Now, Tom Seeley, in a classic paper he wrote, where he looked at the natural nest of Apis mellifera in upstate New York, he found that if you look at the comb and say, okay, worker comb or drone comb, that the average worked out to about 13% of the comb was drones. I mean, the larger cells.
Yeah.
And the student of mine who looked at Apis cerana, she did the same thing, and it worked out to about 15%.
Oh.
So cerana and mellifera are very, very close together. With Florea, there's a lot more variation in there, but they can have an appreciable number of comb available with drones. And so with the giant honeybee, you can't look at an empty comb and say, oh, look, those are drone cells. Right. They're all the same size. So ours is was the first attempt to say, well, okay, this is what they're producing. You know, what's cueing them to produce these drones is a good question. But that was fun. That was a lot of fun in the field work. You know, collecting a giant honeybee colony is a challenge, and this former student of mine, she really developed a good system. So we'd go in there with a team and get the smokers going, and we could be in and out in 30 minutes and have the comb with us, you know, and leaving thousands of bees in the air.
I guess the last thing I just wanted to quickly touch base with you on is you have another paper that came out that is not honeybees, but the other social bees that you have in Thailand, the stingless bees. Tell us about this observation that you made.
Well, if you look at bees as a group, there are maybe 20,000 species worldwide. And if you look at social bees, the biggest group, meaning the most number of species, are what we call stingless bees. And they're all tropical. There's something like 550 described species thus far. They're what we call pantropical, equatorial, all over the world. Africa, Southeast Asia, Northern Australia,
Central America,
South America. By the way, South America, or Central and South America, has the greatest diversity of species. Something like 400 species of stingless bees.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Southeast Asia has 90 species of described stingless bees. Okay. Stingless bees, a pretty good common name. They don't sting because the workers have a vestigial stinger. They can't sting, but they do bite. But their hive biology is very similar to honeybees. There's single reproductive female, the queen. The majority of members are worker bees, the daughters of the queen. There's a small population of males that is seasonal in appearance. They make, instead of using comb to store their honey and pollen in, they literally make pots. And they're sometimes called pot bees. And these are little miniature pots. Well, it depends upon the species.
You know, I was on a Canadian national radio thing, and somebody asked, why is comb hexagonal? And the answer was, well, because that's, you know, the most efficient way. And then I was like, but the answer I gave was like, but most of the bee species in the world don't use hexagons. Correct.
Paper wasps do in their nests.
Yeah.
And all honeybees species do, but there are a lot that don't.
Okay.
So with 80 or almost 90 species, I'm sure there are 90, in Southeast Asia, Thailand has a recorded 34 species of stingless bees. And some of them, and it's a relatively new phenomenon, some of them have been commercialized by humans. There are some species that are amenable to living in a human-made box. And there's one colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, I've known him for a long time, almost 40 years now. He devised a system where you could split a colony. You could make a division from an existing colony. And that was really a spark to get a quote-unquote commercial industry going. 2 years ago, I met the biggest stingless beekeeper in Thailand, and he was running 300 colonies.
Wow. Okay.
Which was wow. Mostly it's people with 20 to 50 to 60 to 70 colonies on a commercial level. Mm-hmm. I say commercial because a colony, if you could lump them all together and make an average, a colony produces 1 pound of honey a year.
Okay.
So there's not a huge amount of honey there. But for that reason, the honey is very, very expensive.
We were to equate it to the U.S. dollar. You're looking at, I've seen it go for as high as $50 a pound.
I have to say, you were kind enough to bring me some, but it's pretty funky honey.
It is. It's quite wet. Usually 25.
I call it prickly in your, in your mouth.
Not at all uncommon to be 30% moisture, but the average is probably about 25%. Okay. It's more acidic. It really grabs you. But historically, it has an ethno-medical application. Mm-hmm. It's, oh my,
in my eye, it'll cure the disease. It's not used as a general sweetener or a food additive.
Right, okay.
It's got its own special uses.
Okay, so they've got resources in there, so they've got to defend it. So tell us a little bit about your observation, because it's pretty remarkable.
Right. For any social insect, colony defense is an important factor. You've got, inside a colony, you have a high concentration of calories, and there are creatures out there that want that. So you have to defend a colony. There was first described in South America about 3 species of stingless bees that utilize flying guard bees, where the guard bees fly out and they hover in front of the colony, ready to attack any non-nest mate.
Oh, so it's just kind of like, I imagine the Air Force for bomber defense puts these planes up in the air and they hover around and then they go home again. Okay, gotcha.
And the most studied species in South America was a German who came out and said, hey, these are actually, he did a bunch of morphometric measurements and said they're a separate caste.
Oh, be darned.
They have a guard bee caste.
Okay, so these are like a specialized task?
Yes. Okay. Very, very interesting. All right. So, with all my trips to Thailand, I've noticed there's this one species that has this beautiful name of Tetragona apicalis.
Ooh, that's a nice name.
That has a cadre of flying guard bees. So, they are not kept by humans. They are not amenable to be thrown in a box. We've done this 3 times now, and transferred colonies into stingless bee boxes. And the best one we ever had lasted a year and then just petered out.
But the thing I remember about when I saw your slideshow, they have these remarkable trumpet-like entrances.
Yes. And that's another defense strategy by stingless bees. Many species of stingless bees. They make these elaborate nest entrance tubes that make it easier for them to defend the hive.
What's it made out of?
Depends. This bee where we published, it's almost pure resin.
Oh, wow.
And the bees are huge collectors of propolis.
I'll do that.
Huge collectors. And
I've seen these nests where the nest entrance, it looks like a trumpet that you ran over with a car, a flattened trumpet bell.
So they collected all this resin, made this flattened trumpet bell, and then there are these bees hovering
out in front of the colony.
Out in front of it, okay.
Yeah. And we found that, we had a colony. It was nesting in an armoire in the dormitory at Chiang Mai University on the 2nd floor, and for some reason they threw the armoire off the balcony. Just threw it on the ground. Well, this actually is a faculty dormitory. So one of the faculty members saw this and called my colleague. So we ran over there and, oh, wow. So we went over there with a bee box and we recovered the colony. And we got them into the bee box and let them sit there for a week to where the bees could be, they're in the same place, but something's a little different. But they accepted the colony and we moved it over to outside our laboratory so we could study it. But I was always curious. These bees fly out, and it's this beautiful, slow-moving cloud of bees. They're just visually so appealing. So how long are you doing that? You know, you've got this job of defending the colony flying out. How long are you doing it? So we mounted a camera and set up a camera, and we monitored this hive. Oh, we didn't do it every day, but we had 3 months of observations. I think something like 25 days that we looked at it, 8 hours a day. And then we just brought the film back into the lab, and one of the reasons you have graduate students is you sit them down to monitor. Uh-huh. So I did a bunch of the monitoring too. Anyway, this colony was, because we'd rehived it, their initial cadre of guard bees was 1 to 2 to 3 bees.
Okay.
So, I mean, when there's a cloud of 25 bees there, to see one bee come out and try to follow that one bee,
it must be
almost impossible.
Yeah.
So here we had an opportunity with a small number of guard bees to where we could, you know, the film had a timestamp on it, so we could say, hey, okay, this bee came out at 9:20 in the morning, and we could just follow her visually in the film until she went back in. And,
so were they flying for like a minute or two or so, and then flying
okay, the average was 16 minutes.
16 minutes?
Or about 16 and a half minutes, something like that.
They went out and they flew for, that's a lot of hovering.
A lot of energy, and it's a small bee. It's not a large bee. Huh. Though the ones that were, the one species in South America, though I kind of questioned the strength of the database, but they came out with a figure of over 30 minutes for those bees. But our longest bee on record, she was out there for 1 hour and 20 minutes.
Wow.
Just in a constant hover. You know, they move slowly, but they're about 2 to 3 to 4 inches.
What happens if a predator comes up to them?
This is amazing.
Huh.
We had a total of something like 30 hours of watching the bees, of film. We never saw a predatory attack. And this colony was in an apiary that had 4 other species, colonies with 4 other species of stingless bees. And once in a while, you'd see another species come flying up and then out, or gone immediately. The other bee was in and out, not into the nest entrance, but into the vicinity of the nest entrance, and this oops, and then out.
So it's a formidable defense, eh?
Well, the thing is, I never saw a flying guard bee go after one, but we had not very many instances of this happening. So you're expending a lot of energy by sending out a group of bees to guard. And these colonies, no one's done it yet, and I hope to do it, but I'm guessing a big colony would have 5,000 to 6,000 bees in it, if that many. And it may be much closer to 1,000. That you're sending out 25 bees, hey, your turn, go out there. And is it related to the age of the bee? We don't know.
Like in honeybees, yeah.
So there's lots more work to do on it. But I'd seen this before. I know other entomologists in Thailand and said, oh yeah, that bee always does that. So I go into the literature to find out where it's first been noted that, hey, this species of stingless bee has flying guards. Never found a paper on it.
Be hard.
And I went, wow. So when we first submitted the manuscript, we had given it a little different tone. And one of the reviewers said, you need to strengthen the fact that this is the first published observation of this behavior. I said, okay, we'll do that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for giving us a little tour of tropical social bees. This has been fascinating, and I can't wait to see what the next episode with you is going to be about.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's not me being stung to death by a colony of giant honeybees.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn, Sin, and Neil, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.